The popping of the champagne cork was the starting pistol of his new life, a sound he would later recall as the first note of his own requiem. He celebrated his divorce victory with champagne, not knowing his ex-wife's quiet father had already begun his final move from a cabin 150 miles away, a move as silent and inevitable as a moon pulling the tide. Lucas Kane stood at the peak of a mountain he'd spent a decade constructing from other people's dreams and dollars, and the air up there was thin, intoxicating, and utterly deceptive. Lucas Kane felt invincible. The feeling was a chemical warmth in his veins, more potent than the vintage Dom Perignon in his crystal flute. In the soft, expensive glow of a chandelier whose crystals refracted the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows, he raised his glass. The liquid within cost more than a car payment, more than the monthly rent of the entire restaurant staff bustling around him. "To freedom," he announced, his voice a confident baritone that carried across the plush, semi-private booth, demanding to be overheard. He wanted an audience for his liberation. Across the polished mahogany sat two accomplices to his triumph. David, his lawyer, was a man with a smile that never reached his cold, assessing eyes, a man whose ethics were not just negotiable but came with a sliding scale billing rate. Beside him, a stark contrast of youth and avarice, was Chloe. At 23, her ambition was a tangible force, as sharp and defined as the cut of her designer dress. Her attention was not on the man beside her, but fixed on the glowing screen of her phone. Scrolling through Zillow listings of waterfront properties and penthouses, mentally redecorating spaces she now considered her rightful domain. "You left her with nothing but that old sedan and the debt from that failing art gallery." David chuckled, the sound like grinding stones. He adjusted his solid gold cufflinks, a gift from Lucas after a previous, similarly ruthless victory. "It's masterful, clinical. I've seen aggressive settlements, but this was a work of art." Lucas savored the dry, complex taste of the champagne, a smirk playing on his lips like a familiar, cherished shadow. "Amelia was always naive," he stated, swirling the golden liquid. "She operated on this childish belief in fairness, in some cosmic balance sheet, where good deeds got you credit. I simply educated her. I provided a practical demonstration of how the world truly functions." He was, after all, the founder and CEO of Kane Solutions, a logistics empire he'd ostensibly built from the ground up over a decade. The press releases, the Forbes profiles, they all told that story. The truth, a secret buried under layers of shell companies and forged documents, was that the venture seed capital had been a quiet $500,000 inheritance from Amelia's grandmother, money she had entrusted to him with starry-eyed faith. He had not just used it, he had consumed it, and then meticulously erased its digital and paper trails, a ghost debt that would never be acknowledged. A flicker of pragmatic concern crossed Chloe's face as she glanced up from a virtual tour of a Bal Harbour condo. "What about her family?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "You mentioned once her dad was intimidating, a scary guy from way back." Lucas let out a short, derisive laugh that cut through the cultured murmur of the restaurant. It was a bark of pure contempt. "Henry? He's a hermit, a relic. He lives in a weathered wooden cabin in the Catskills that probably doesn't have reliable Wi-Fi. H.E. Gardens. He reads dusty, depressing Russian novels. He's a ghost, Chloe. He holds zero power, financial, social, or otherwise. He wasn't even at the wedding. Sent a basket of heirloom tomatoes as a gift." His phone buzzed against a fine linen tablecloth, a vulgar intrusion. The screen illuminated with a text from Amelia. "Last boxes are gone by 8. He didn't hesitate. His thumbs flew over the screen, typing a quick, cruel reply. "It's my house. Be gone by 7, or I will have security physically remove you." He showed the screen to David, sharing a silent, gloating grin of conquest. "Trouble?" David asked, already knowing the answer, enjoying the ritual. "Just the cleanup crew," Lucas said, raising a hand to signal the sommelier. "Another bottle of the 08, and put it on the Kane Solutions corporate card." He leaned back, the epitome of relaxed power. The divorce was finalized at 4:07 p.m. Legally, as of that moment, she can't touch a single cent of company funds. Every drop of this is mine. They drank as the city lights far below the panoramic windows smeared into golden, liquid streaks, a river of molten ambition and wealth. Lucas felt like a king, a titan, a self-made deity. He had not just climbed the ladder. He had bought the company that made the ladder, fired the original climbers, and then sawed off the rungs behind him. The champagne was ambrosia, the taste of a future gloriously, triumphantly unburdened. The weather had turned during the drive, as if the universe itself was setting a stage. The rain began as a whisper, a gentle tap-tap against the tinted windows of his black Range Rover, then escalated into a pounding, relentless drum roll as he navigated the winding, tree-lined roads of Greenwich. His mansion, a sprawling neo-colonial monument to his success, materialized to the aqueous curtain, its white pillars gleaming like bleached bones in the sweeping arcs of his headlights. It was more than a house. It was a symbol of everything he had taken, everything he believed he had earned through sheer force of will. And there, a solitary, sodden figure marring the perfect picture, stood the last remnant of his old life, soon to be washed away. Amelia struggled with a warped, heavy cardboard box beside her aged Honda Civic, the one asset the judge had graciously allowed her to keep. Lucas didn't park. He pulled up slowly and honked, long and loud, a blast of sonic triumph meant to startle. It worked. She flinched, and the box slipped from her grasp. A cascade of books, her beloved, worn leather-bound volumes of Austen, Bronte, Tolstoy, spilled onto the wet black asphalt, their pages fanning open and immediately darkening with a relentless rain. I said 7 o'clock. Lucas shouted, throwing his door open and stepping out into the deluge without an umbrella. He wanted her to see him like this, impervious, untouched by the storm that soaked to the skin, his Brioni suit beating water, but otherwise unaffected. Chloe emerged from the passenger side, a silent, elegant specter holding a vast designer umbrella that sheltered only herself. She glided over, her heels clicking on the pavement like precise little hammers. "Need a hand?" she asked, her voice a parody of concerned sweetness. She extended a manicured foot, clad in a shoe that cost more than Amelia's entire remaining net worth, and nudged a copy of Jane Eyre directly into a deepening, oily puddle. Oops. The word hung in the air, a perfect droplet of malice. Amelia looked up. Rain streamed down her face in rivulets, indistinguishable from tears, but her eyes, those were different. The soft, forgiving light Lucas had spent years slowly extinguishing was gone, completely. In its place was a cold, flinty resolve that seemed to reflect his own headlights back at him, twice as bright and startlingly clear. "Enjoy the house, Chloe," Amelia said, her voice trembling from the cold but unervingly clear, each word a carefully placed, unshakable stone. "It has surprisingly thin walls. You'll hear every lie he tells you before he even finishes speaking." "Get off my property," Lucas snarled, his regal composure cracking under the raw nerve her words exposed. He strode forward and kicked a pile of soggy books, sending a few skittering across the pavement and into the overflowing gutter. "You won. It's done. Why be so cruel?" she whispered, the question not a plea but an accusation that hung in the rain-choked air between them. "Because I can," Lucas hissed, leaning in so close he could see the faint constellation of freckles across her nose, a map he had once known by heart and had since deliberately forgotten. "You were a placeholder, Amelia, a temporary assistant in the grand story of me. I built this, all of it." She stared at him for a long, silent moment, a look that seemed to see past the $8,000 suit, the $40,000 watch, the entire carefully constructed facade, and perceived the hollow, frantic thing at its center. Then, without another word, she turned her back on him. She slammed the trunk shut on her meager, salvage life, got into the driver's seat of the old Honda, and turned the key. The engine coughed, protested, then caught with a reluctant sputter. as her taillights diminished into two red pinpricks swallowed by the dark, watery night. Lucas called out, his voice raw with contempt he mistook for strength. "Go cry to your father." "Oh, wait, he's just a gardener." The words hung behind him like a curse. He didn't know he was speaking onto himself. Their poison seeping into the manicured lawn of his stolen estate. Meanwhile, 150 miles north, the same storm system lashed the ancient granite peaks of the Catskills. Here, the rain was cleaner, sharper, smelling of pine and loam. It beat a steady, purposeful rhythm on the cedar shingles of a small, unassuming cabin tucked against a hillside. Inside, the world was warmth and quiet. A fire crackled and breathed in a riverstone hearth, its light dancing across walls lined with books that were actually read, their spines cracked and softened by time and attention. Henry Vance, 72, moved with the deliberate, economical grace of an old tree swaying in a familiar wind. He was in the middle of annotating a volume of Marcus Aurelius when the old, rotary-dial landline phone on the side table jangled to life, a sound both archaic and urgent. He marked his page and answered on the third ring. "Dad?" The voice on the other end was shattered glass, a sound of pure fracture that hadn't reached his ears since she was a little girl who had fallen from the apple tree and broken her arm. "It's Amelia." Henry's knuckles whitened around the heavy plastic receiver, the tendons and veins in his hand standing out like topographic lines on a map of strain. He didn't speak. He became a vessel, a silent repository, as his daughter unraveled the story. It came out in ragged bursts, punctuated by hitched breaths and stifled sobs. The humiliating coldness of the court hearings where she felt like a ghost in her own life. The smug, knowing glances between Lucas and his lawyer. The discovery of the hidden offshore accounts in the Caymans and Bermuda. The girlfriend with the pitiless eyes. The cold rain. The kickbook spreading in the gutter like wounded birds. He absorbed every detail, every inflection of her pain, the specific brand of her shame. He was a forensic accountant of the heart in that moment, collecting the emotional evidence. When her sobs finally subsided into ragged, hiccuping breaths, when the silence on the line was just the static of her exhaustion, his voice came through. It was soft, a blanket of sound woven from decades of love. "You're safe now, Ellie. It's over. Come home tomorrow. The guest room is made up, and the blue quilt you always liked is on the bed." He bragged Dad. "At dinner with her," he said, he won. He said I was nothing, that I was a passenger. The words were barely audible. "Arrogance doesn't just blind men, Ellie," Henry replied, a glacial, tectonic calm settling into his tone. A deep and silent winter descended in his pale blue eyes, extinguishing their usual gentle warmth. "It makes them deaf. It convinces them the only sounds in the universe are the echoes of their own voice." He reached for a weathered, black moleskine notebook on the table beside his chair. Its cover was cracked and supple with age. He opened it to a tab page near the middle. The heading was written in his precise, block-letter architect's hand. Lucas Kane, Active Contingencies. "He thinks he divorced a homemaker," Henry said, his voice now low and focused, the voice of a general surveying a battlefield. "He'll learn, too late, that he picked a fight with the wrong bloodline." He paused, and in that pause was the weight of decades of observed folly, of quietly rectifying imbalances. "Wolves," he said finally, the word dropping into the quiet of the cabin like a stone into a still pond, "are only dangerous until they meet the bear." The next morning, in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Kane Solutions Tower, Lucas stood before a wall of flawless glass, the entirety of Manhattan sprawled beneath him like a glittering, living circuit board he believed he controlled. Today was the day. The merger with Titan Freight, a European shipping behemoth, was imminent. The signing was scheduled for 3 p.m. This deal would catapult him from national player to global powerhouse, the crowning achievement of his career. His assistant's voice, usually so smooth, held a faint, unfamiliar note of anxiety as it buzzed through the intercom. "Mr. Kane, the due diligence team from Titan is here. A Ms. Clark is leading them." The woman who entered was all sharp angles and colder light. Miss Clark wore a severely cut suit and glasses that seemed to reflect the room back at itself. She dispensed with greetings. "We found an anomaly, Mr. Kane. A significant one. The subsidiary accounts in Bermuda, held under the shell company Apex Holdings. Our forensic audit shows them as empty, zero balance. Lucas's blood, a moment ago pumping with anticipatory triumph, turned to ice water. A slick, cold trickle of primal dread traced its way down his spine. He forced a laugh, a dry, brittle sound. That's a technical error, Miss Clark. A glitch in the data feed between our servers and yours. There's over $8.2 million in that account. It's the liquidity reserve for the Pacific expansion." Miss Clark didn't blink. She placed a thin file on the vast, empty surface of his mahogany desk. "The Bank of Hamilton confirmed the transaction directly to us this morning at our request. The funds were wire transferred yesterday at 9:15 a.m. local time to a charitable trust registered for the support of victims of corporate and financial fraud. The balance as of that transfer is zero. Until this discrepancy is fully resolved and the provenance of those funds verified, the merger is on hold indefinitely." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned and left, her heels clicking a staccato death knell on his polished concrete floors. The moment the door clicked shut, Lucas lunged for his phone, his fingers clumsy. He dialed a private, direct line for his contact at the bank, a man named Fitz who had handled his special accounts for years. The line rang, and then a flat, automated female voice. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please check the number and try again." He stared at the phone as if it had transformed into a serpent in his hand. He tried again. Same message. A void where a lifeline should have been. At the cabin, the morning air was crisp and pine-scented, carrying the promise of autumn. Amelia, wrapped in one of her father's oversized, cable-knit wool sweaters that smelled of wood smoke and old books, sat on the sun-warmed porch steps. She watched Henry split logs for the winter store. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Each swing of the axe was economical, perfect, the blade biting deep into the heart of the wood, with a sound of clean fracture. There was a terrifying, peaceful efficiency to it. "You said you were going to make phone calls," she said, her voice still fragile like a convalescence. "But you've just been gardening, chopping wood, making stew." Henry paused, resting the axe head on the chopping block, and wiped his brow with a faded blue bandana. He looked at her, his expression patient. "You know how a demolition expert brings down a 40-story skyscraper in the middle of a crowded city, Ellie?" he asked. "It's not about brute force. It's about knowledge. You study the original blueprints. You find the critical load-bearing points, the specific steel beams that hold all the weight that keep the whole precarious thing standing. You place your shaped charges there, precisely. Then you don't push the building over. You simply remove the support. You step back, and gravity," he made a gentle, descending motion with his hand, "does the rest. It's elegant. It's inevitable." He reached into the pocket of his worn corduroy trousers and pulled out a small, unremarkable silver USB drive. He tossed it to her underhand. It landed in her palm, cool and light, almost insignificant. "What is this?" "That," Henry said, his voice quiet but clear in the mountain silence, "is a digital skeleton key. It contains the master override codes and a zero-day backdoor vulnerability for the legacy banking software still used by the Banco de Bermuda. I wrote the original security and compliance architecture for them in 1999. They've updated the wallpaper and changed the furniture a dozen times since, but they never changed the locks on the back door. Too expensive. Too much hassle." He picked up the axe again. "I just repatriated your grandmother's inheritance, Ellie, with considerable interest, and I donated it in the name of Kane Solutions corporate outreach to a cause that will haunt him if he tries to publicly reclaim it. He admits to the embezzlement and tax fraud. If he stays silent, He's broke and his merger collapses. It's a checkmate he didn't even see coming on the board. Amelia stared at the tiny piece of metal in her hand, an object that had just invisibly moved millions of dollars and shattered a man's future. How could one man, a retired man in a cardigan and work boots, wield such silent, surgical power? The lesson was as old as time, but forever new. The quiet ones, it seems, are often the most formidable. Their strength is not in their roar, but in the absolute certainty of their reach, in knowing exactly which thread to pull to unravel the whole tapestry. Back in Manhattan, Lucas's meticulously ordered world began to fray at the edges, then unravel in great, gulping pulls. David, his lawyer, called, his voice stripped of its usual oily, confident timbre, replaced by raw, undiluted panic. The State Bar Association, Lucas, they have a dossier, a complete fucking annotated dossier. It has everything, every backdated stock option form, every coerced settlement from the early days, every off-the-record, ex-parte conversation I had with judges' clerks. They have dates, amounts, digital fingerprints I didn't even know existed. From who? Lucas demanded his office, once a throne room, now feeling like a tightening prison cell. The cityscape outside seemed to mock him. I don't know. The email came from an encrypted, anonymous server that's already vanished. The subject line just said, "The first domino." Jesus, Lucas, they're going to disbar me. I could face charges. The call ended with a choked click. Lucas sank into his $15,000 ergonomic chair, which now felt like a slab of stone. The silence after David's frantic disconnect was deafening, a physical pressure in the room. His empire, a glittering, complex structure built on hidden beams of fraud, deceit, and stolen capital, was groaning under a new invisible and incredibly precise weight. Determined to project an image of unshakable normalcy, to show the world he was untouched by these temporary tremors, Lucas insisted on attending the Metropolitan Museum's charity gala that evening. It was the social event of the season, a room packed with the very people whose perception was his oxygen. He wore a Tom Ford tuxedo that cost $5,000, but it hung on him like a shroud. Chloe on his arm was a beautiful, silent accessory, but her eyes darted around the room nervously, calculating the social cost of being seen with him. The usual crowd of sycophants, analysts, and aspirants seemed to part around him as he moved, creating a bubble of palpable isolation. Then, Silas Thorne, no relation, a legendary, silver-haired investor whose gnaw could make or destroy fortunes, detached himself from a group and approached the bar where Lucas was ordering a double scotch. "Rough night, Kane?" Silas asked, swirling a glass of profoundly expensive burgundy, his eyes like chips of polished flint. "Just the usual envy from the little people, Silas," Lucas quipped, the old, automatic defense rising to his lips. "Comes with the territory at the top." "Does it?" Silas turned fully to face him, his expression devoid of warmth or camaraderie. "I received a very interesting piece of communication this morning. A fax of all things. Quaint. It was a verbatim transcript of a conversation between you and your mistress. Sorry, your fiancé at the grill the night of your divorce. You were quite detailed and quite loud about the mechanisms of hiding assets, the shell companies, the Cayman accounts, the way you corrected her worldview." Silas took a slow sip. "It's not the crime, Lucas. It's the boasting, the sheer, unforced arrogance of it. That transcript was sent to the entire board of directors of Titan Freight. They aren't just pausing the merger, son. They're pulling out tonight. You're toxic, Julian. Nobody is going to touch you. You're radioactive." Silas patted Lucas on the shoulder, a gesture that felt like a death sentence. "You're toxic, Julian. Nobody is going to touch you. You're radioactive." Silas walked away. Lucas stood alone at the bar, the noise of the party fading into a high-pitched ringing in his ears. He grabbed Chloe's arm hard. "We're leaving." "Ow!" "Julian, stop. I haven't even had dessert. We're leaving now." He dragged her out of the ballroom, ignoring the stares. The car ride home was a silent, tense nightmare. "You're hurting me." Sophia screamed as he sped down the highway. "What is wrong with you?" "Shut up." Lucas roared, hitting the steering wheel. "Someone is doing this. Someone is systematically destroying me." "Who?" Chloe cried. "Elena." "She's too stupid." "It's not Elena." Lucas yelled. It has to be someone powerful. A competitor. Maybe Titan themselves trying to lower the price. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It was a private investigator named Rocco, a man who found dirt for a living. "Rocco, it's Kane. I need a job done tonight." "I'm expensive, Mr. Kane." Rocco's gravelly voice answered. "I don't care. I need you to find out everything you can about Henry Vance, my ex-wife's father." "Vance?" Rocco paused. The silence on the line stretched for 10 seconds. "Rocco, I can't take the job, Mr. Kane." "What?" "I'll pay double." "I don't want your money," Rocco said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "If you're messing with Arthur Vance, you're already dead. You just don't know it yet." "He's a tomato farmer," Lucas screamed. "He's the accountant," Rocco said. 20 years ago, he dismantled a Credit crime family from the inside using nothing but a spreadsheet. He made 3 billionaires disappear from the Forbes list in a week. We all thought he died. If he's coming for you, my advice, run. Leave the country. Don't go home. Click. Lucas stared at the phone. The accountant. He looked at Chloe. She was staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Lucas," she whispered, pointing out the window. "Look." They were pulling up to the Greenwich estate. The house was dark, but it wasn't just the lights. The front gate was open, and sitting on the front steps of the massive mansion was a single wooden chair. Sitting in the chair was a small leather-bound book. Lucas stopped the car. He told Chloe to stay inside. He walked slowly up the driveway, the gravel crunching under his dress shoes. The wind howled through the trees. He reached the chair. He picked up the book. It was one of the books he had kicked into the gutter, The Count of Monte Cristo. It was dry, clean. There was a bookmark sticking out. Lucas opened it to the marked page. A passage was highlighted in yellow. "I have been taken by Satan into the highest mountain in the earth. And when he showed me all the kingdoms of the world, and said to me, 'All these things will I give thee if thou wilt fall down and worship me.' I said, 'Get thee behind me, Satan.'" Below the text, a note was handwritten in elegant cursive. "You worship the money, Lucas. Now the bill is due." Suddenly, floodlights from the lawn blazed to life, blinding him. Lucas shielded his eyes. "Police." A voice boomed from the darkness. "Lucas Kane, put your hands in the air." Red and blue lights flickered against the white pillars of his stolen house. "What is this?" Lucas screamed. "I own this house." A detective stepped out of the glare. "Mr. Kane, we have a warrant for your arrest regarding tax evasion, securities fraud, and the embezzlement of funds from the Vance estate." As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, tight, cold, and unforgiving, Lucas looked past the police cars. Parked across the street in the shadows was an old, nondescript pickup truck. Lucas squinted. The window of the truck rolled down slowly. An old man with white hair sat in the driver's seat. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He simply nodded once and then rolled the window back up. Arthur Vance drove away into the night, leaving Lucas Kane to scream his innocence to officers who had already seen the evidence. But this wasn't the end. This was just a foreclosure. The sentencing hearing 6 months later was a public spectacle, a morality play enacted in oak panel theater. The courtroom was packed with faces, former employees, scorned business partners, journalists. Lucas, in an ill-fitting suit, saw Amelia in the gallery. She looked whole, peaceful. Next to her, Henry was a statue of quiet observation. The judge's voice was steel. "You are not an entrepreneur. You are a predator. 15 years in federal prison." The gavel fell. As marshals led him away, Lucas cried out, "Amelia, tell them." She walked to the railing. You weren't a husband, she said, her sadness profound and final. You were a lesson. Henry leaned in. You celebrated taking the queen. You forgot the king was still on the board. At the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville, inmate number 89402 swept the same patch of concrete yard every day. The job paid 12 cents an hour. One day, a guard tossed him a letter. It was a newspaper clipping from a New York Times arts section. The headline read, "Historic Bookstore Becomes Heart of Upstate Town, Funded by Restitution." There was a color photograph of Amelia, laughing, cutting a ribbon in front of a charming storefront called Vance and Daughter. The caption quoted the owner, "We wanted to build something that adds to the world instead of taking from it." And there in the background, slightly out of focus but unmistakable, was Henry, holding a tray of cookies, the quote beneath him reading, "I just help with the gardening." Lucas crumpled the paper in his fist. He had spent 10 years building a castle on sand, and a quiet man with a trowel had washed it all away with the tide of truth. Snow fell gently outside the Catskills cabin, blanketing the world in a soft, forgiving white. Inside, the fire crackled, painting dancing shadows on the walls. Amelia handed her father a mug of steaming cocoa. "Marcus's wife called today," she said. He was disbarred. "He can't find work. She wondered if we knew of anything." Henry took a slow sip, his eyes on the flames. "Old man Jenkins down at the dairy farm needs help mucking out stalls. It's hard, honest work. Good for the soul." Amelia laughed, a sound that was warm and real, and filled the room. Henry smiled. He looked at his daughter, then out at the silent, snow-draped night. Power, he mused, isn't about noise or bluster. It isn't about grabbing and shouting. Real power is like gravity. Silent, invisible, undeniable. It's the force that keeps your feet on the ground. And if you're foolish enough to think you can fight it, you will always, inevitably, fall. His victory party, with its champagne and smug toasts, was the beginning of his end. Did you expect a father's revenge to be so meticulous, so complete? The silence of the prison was different from any silence Lucas had ever known. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a penthouse at dawn, or the respectful hush of a boardroom before he entered. This silence was thick, heavy, and hungry. It was the sound of time being wasted, of potential rotting, of a world moving on without you. Inmate number 89402 learned its textures. The distant clang of steel doors, the murmur of the guards' radios, the shuffling of countless feet on wax linoleum. His hands, which once signed million-dollar deals, now spent hours each day folding laundry in the prison laundry, the industrial bleach burning his nostrils, the heat of the dryers a constant, suffocating blanket. He learned the hierarchy, a brutal, simple economy where his former wealth was a liability, a joke. His stories of mergers and acquisitions were met with blank stares or sneers. Here, power was physical. It was in the width of a man's shoulders, the coldness in his eyes, the network of alliances formed over cigarettes and commissary snacks. Lucas was neither large nor cold. He was a white-collar fish, and the predators circled. He paid for protection with phone privileges. With a few dollars his court-appointed trustee allowed into his account from the sale of his last remaining asset, a vintage watch he'd hidden in his lawyer's safe. The watch was gone now, converted into packets of ramen and stamped envelopes. The lawyer, David, was gone too, disbarred and facing his own, lesser charges. A broken man Lucas heard had taken a job as a telemarketer. The newspaper clipping about the bookstore was not the last he heard of the world outside. It was simply the most devastating. Other snippets filtered in. A former junior executive, a woman he'd once fired for questioning his accounting, had started a successful logistics consultancy focused on ethical transparency. Her interview in a trade magazine was posted on the prison library's bulletin board. Someone had circled the line, "We prove you don't have to be a predator to be profitable." He saw a gossip item about Chloe. She had leveraged her notoriety as the other woman in the Kane divorce saga into a minor reality TV appearance, followed by a swiftly canceled podcast about dating ambitious men. The comments under the article he glimpsed on a guard's computer were merciless. She was a punchline. He was a cautionary tale. The most profound punishment was the boredom. His mind, once a whirlwind of schemes and strategies and adrenaline, had nothing to chew on but the past. And the past, under the relentless microscope of his empty present, began to warp and change. The memories he'd polished into trophies, the high-stakes negotiations, the artful deceptions, now unspooled his mind's eye with new, horrible clarity. He saw not his own cleverness, but the flicker of hurt in a competitor's eyes he'd crushed. He heard not his winning argument, but the tremor in Amelia's voice the first time he'd told her she was bad with money and should just let him handle everything. He had told himself he was building an empire. Lying on his thin prison bunk, he began to see the truth. He had been building a tomb, and he was the only occupant. One day, during his sweeping duty in the yard, a new inmate was assigned to his block. A young man, barely out of his teens, with a skittish energy and a black eye fading to yellow. He reminded Lucas of himself at 22, all hunger and no patience. The kid, whose name was Miguel, sought Lucas out. "They say you used to be a big deal." "A CO. Used to be," Lucas grunted, not stopping his sweeping. "I got this idea, see," Miguel said, his words tumbling out. "For an app, it's like for community organizing, but with blockchain verification to prevent fraud. I have the wireframes in my head. I just need someone who knows about capital, about structure." Lucas listened. The idea was half-baked, naive, filled with technological buzzwords and idealistic jargon. A year ago, he would have seen a mark, a pigeon to be plucked. He would have nodded, promised connections, and slowly, subtly, begun figuring out how to own the idea, then the kid, then whatever scraps of value could be extracted. Now he just felt tired. He saw the desperate hope in Miguel's eyes, the need for a ladder, any ladder, out of his circumstances. He stopped sweeping and leaned on the broom. "They have a business class here on Thursdays," Lucas said, his voice flat. "Run by a volunteer from the community college. It's basic. Bookkeeping, writing a business plan. Start there and lose the blockchain part. Solve a real problem for real people first. The tech comes after." Miguel's face fell, the bright energy dimming into disappointment. "So you won't help?" "I just did," Lucas said, and resumed sweeping, pushing a small pile of dust and faded autumn leaves toward the drain. He had given the most honest, useful advice of his life, and it felt like nothing. It felt like throwing a pebble into a deep, dark well and hearing no splash. Meanwhile, in the town of Pine Ridge, the first anniversary of Vance and Daughter, books and curiosities approached. The store was no longer a novelty, but a fixture. It occupied a lovingly restored brick building on Main Street, with deep-set windows that glowed like amber in the evening. Inside, the smell was of old paper, fresh coffee, and the subtle, clean scent of the lemon oil polish Amelia used on the wooden floors. Henry had built all the bookshelves himself, from reclaimed barnwood. They were not perfectly level. Each one had its own character, its own slight warp, and they were perpetually full. Amelia had discovered she had a talent for this, not just for retail, but for curation, for community. She hosted a book club that debated Faulkner with as much passion as the latest bestseller. She set up a cozy corner with armchairs for students from the local college. She invited authors for readings, not just the famous ones, but local historians, poets, even a retired forester who wrote chapbooks about trees. The store was alive. It was the opposite of the cold, echoing galleries of her past life. Spaces designed for prestige, not people. Henry was, as ever, the silent engine in the background. He tended the small, thriving garden in the courtyard behind the store, growing herbs and flowers she used for teas and window displays. He fixed the ancient plumbing when it groaned, tuned up the delivery van, and handled the store's complex accounts with an ease that made their CPA whistle in admiration. But his primary role, as far as Amelia could tell, was simply being present, a steady, calm presence in the storeroom, sipping tea and reading, always available but never intrusive. He was her anchor. One afternoon, a woman came into the store, well-dressed but with the harried look of someone from the city. She browsed for a long time, her fingers lingering on the spines of the classics section. Finally, she approached the counter, where Amelia was unpacking a shipment of new journals. "I'm looking for a gift," the woman said. "For my father. He's retiring from a high-pressure career. I think he's a bit lost." Amelia smiled. "What does he like to do?" The woman gave a sad little laugh. "That's just it. I don't know. He's always been working. I thought maybe a book, something about finding peace or starting a new chapter." Amelia thought for a moment. She didn't go to the self-help section. Instead, she walked to nature writing and pulled a slim, beautiful volume. "This is called A Forest Unseen," she said. "It's a biologist's journal about observing 1 square meter of old-growth forest over a year. It's about paying attention, about seeing the whole world in a small, quiet place." She handed it to the woman. "It's not about finding yourself. It's about remembering that you're already part of something bigger." The woman's eyes filled with unexpected tears. She bought the book and 2 others. After she left, Henry emerged from the back, a feathered duster in his hand. "You gave her the David Haskell book," he stated. "She needed it," Amelia said. Henry nodded, a look of deep approval in his eyes. "You didn't sell her a solution. You gave her an invitation. That's the difference between a transaction and a gift." He went back to dusting the top shelves, a man completely at peace with his place in the universe. In prison, Lucas was called to the warden's office. This was never a good sign. His mind raced with possibilities. A new charge, a lawsuit, a problem with his appeal, which was, his public defender had made clear, a hopeless long shot. He was led in, hands cuffed in front of him. Sitting across from the warden's desk was not a lawyer or a federal agent, but a man in a simple, functional suit. He had a kind, weary face and introduced himself as Mr. Evans from the state's Restorative Justice Initiative. "Mr. Kane," Evans began, "you have a unique skill set, or you did, understanding complex financial systems, corporate structures." Lucas said nothing, his guard up. "We have a pilot program," Evans continued, "working with nonviolent white-collar offenders. We partner with local community colleges. The idea is to have you help teach, not advanced finance, but basics. Financial literacy for small business owners, for single parents, for people who have been preyed upon by predatory lenders or scams, people who have been, in a way, victims of the same ecosystem you operated in." Lucas was stunned. "You want me to teach?" "The warden here thinks you've been a model prisoner. No trouble. You keep to yourself. The goal is rehabilitation, Mr. Kane. Contributing. Using what you know, not for personal gain, but to prevent others from being harmed. It's voluntary. But it comes with certain privileges. Extended library computer access, a slightly more private tutoring space." It was a trick. It had to be. Some new, subtle form of humiliation. Yet the man's eyes were earnest, and the offer, extended library computer access. It was a window, a tiny, monitored, pathetic window, but a window nonetheless to a world of information, of mental stimulation beyond the prison walls. "Why?" Lucas asked, the word escaping before he could stop it. Evans leaned forward slightly. "Because the damage you did was vast, but abstract, spread across pension funds, shareholders, a single ex-wife. It's hard to make amends for that. This is a chance to do concrete, measurable good, to balance the ledger just a little in a way that matters to real people." The phrase "balance the ledger" echoed in Lucas's head. Amelia's voice. She believed in fairness, in some cosmic ledger where good deeds were tallied. He had mocked it. Now, the state was offering him a literal ledger to balance. "I'll do it," he heard himself say. The first class was a disaster. He was in a small, brightly lit room in the prison's educational wing. facing 6 community members who had been bussed in. They were a mix. A young mother who wanted to open a daycare, an aging mechanic hoping to formalize his business, a couple who ran a food truck. They looked at him with a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and resentment. He saw himself through their eyes, a convict in a jumpsuit, a living example of where greed leads. He launched into what he knew. He started talking about LLC structures, about tax advantages, about capitalization tables. Their eyes glazed over within minutes. The mechanic, a large man named Ray, finally interrupted. "Look, Professor, I just want to know if I should bother charging sales tax on a rebuilt carburetor, or if that's going to bring the state down on me like a ton of bricks. I don't need a corporation. I need to not go to jail over paperwork." The room was silent. Lucas's carefully prepared notes were useless. He had completely missed the point. He was trying to teach them to build skyscrapers when they needed help laying a stable foundation. He took a breath, put his notes aside. "Okay," he said. "Forget everything I just said. Let's start with your carburetor, Ray." The next week, he was better. He listened. He answered questions about record keeping, about separating personal and business expenses, about simple, free accounting software. He found himself explaining, in the clearest terms possible, the kinds of financial tricks and opaque language that predators like his former self used to confuse people. "If you don't understand it, don't sign it," he heard himself say. "If it sounds too good to be true, it is. Your intuition is a better financial advisor than most people with a fancy title." One of the women, Maria, who wanted to start the daycare, stayed after. "You talk about this stuff like you know the traps," she said quietly. "My cousin, she lost everything to one of those timeshare scams. They talk so fast, use so many big words." Lucas met her gaze. "They do that on purpose," he said, his voice low. "The complexity is the weapon. It's designed to make you feel stupid, so you'll just sign to make it stop. The best defense is to slow down, to ask for everything in writing, to say, 'I need to show this to my niece who's in college.' There's no prize for signing fast." Maria nodded, a look of hard-won understanding in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. It was the first genuine thank you Lucas had received in years that wasn't from a guard for following an order. It didn't feel good, exactly. It felt heavy, responsible. At the bookstore, a different kind of education was happening. A local boy, maybe 14, had started hanging around after school. He was shy, a bit awkward, and Amelia often found in the science fiction section, reading books he clearly couldn't afford. His name was Leo. One day, she found him trying to discreetly fix a wobbly leg on one of the reading chairs with a piece of folded cardboard. "Don't worry about that, Leo," she said. "My dad will get it." Leo jumped, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Miss Vance. I like it here. I didn't want it to break." Henry, who had been observing from the history aisle, ambled over. "You have a good eye for what's unstable," he said, his voice not unkind. He examined the chair. "Cardboard's a temporary fix. The joint is loose. Needs glue and a clamp." He looked at Leo. "You want to learn how to fix it for real?" Leo's eyes widened. He nodded. Henry took him to the small workshop in the basement. For the next hour, Henry taught Leo how to mix with glue, how to apply it sparingly, how to use a clamp to hold the joint tight until it bonded. He talked about grain, about patience, about the importance of doing the unseen part of the job right. "Any fool can make something look fixed," Henry said, wiping his hands on a rag. "It takes care to make it stay fixed." Leo left that day with a sense of purpose and a standing invitation to help with odd jobs. Amelia watched her father with the boy. He was passing on something more than carpentry. He was passing on philosophy, that stability is built through attention to fundamentals, through patience, through respecting the integrity of the materials you're given. Later, over tea, she said, "You're good with him." Henry shrugged. "He's at an age where he needs to learn how things are put together, how to mend what's broken. The world's full of people who only know how to take things apart. The contrast was absolute. In a prison classroom, Lucas Kane was teaching people how to spot the predators, how to fend against the takers. In a bookstore basement, Henry Vance was teaching a boy how to be a builder, a mender. Two forms of education born from the same catastrophic failure. The seasons turned. Lucas's teaching became the one thing that gave his incarceration a shred of meaning. He requested more books, simpler texts on personal finance. He developed worksheets. He wasn't inspiring, but he was clear, direct, and his students began to trust his grim, hard-earned expertise. He heard about their small victories. Maria securing a small business loan for her daycare, Ray finally filing his quarterly taxes correctly and getting a modest refund. Their successes were microscopic in the scale of his former world, but they were real. They were built on solid ground. He was in the library, preparing for the next class, when a notification popped up on the monitored computer. It was an automated alert for news containing his name. His stomach clenched. He clicked it. It was a short article in a business ethics blog. The title, The Unlikely Teacher, How a Fallen CEO Finds Redemption in Prison Literacy Program. It quoted Mr. Evans, the program director. It quoted Maria, who said, "He doesn't sugarcoat it. He tells us how people like him think, so we can protect ourselves." It's the most honest class I've ever taken. There was no picture of him, just a stock photo of a classroom. Lucas read it 3 times. Redemption. The word felt foreign, ill-fitting, like a suit from another man's wardrobe. He wasn't redeemed. He was in a cage. He was teaching to escape the mind-numbing torment of his own thoughts. Yet, Maria's quote echoed, how people like him think. He was no longer Lucas Kane, CEO. He was a case study, a specimen of a failed philosophy. And in deconstructing that philosophy for others, he was, for the first time, truly seeing it himself. That night, lying in his bunk, he made a decision. When the guard came by for the nightly count, Lucas spoke up, "I need to request a form. To write a letter." "To who?" the guard asked, bored. "To the U.S. District Court, Southern District of New York," Lucas said, "and to the Vance Family Trust." The guard raised an eyebrow, but made a note. The forms arrived 2 days later. Lucas filled them out with intense concentration. The first was a formal, legal document. He withdrew his appeal. He acknowledged the totality of the evidence against him and accepted his sentence. He wrote, "I understand now that the system worked. I was the flaw." The second letter was harder. He wrote draft after draft on scrap paper before committing words to the official form. It was to Amelia and Henry. "Amelia, Henry, I am not writing to ask for forgiveness. I have no right to it, and it would change nothing for you. I am writing to say that I see it now. The damage, the cruelty, the small, daily thefts of dignity that were the foundation of the larger crimes. I treated people as instruments. I treated your loyalty, Amelia, as a weakness to be exploited. I treated your silence, Henry, as emptiness. I was wrong on every count. I am in a program where I teach people how to avoid people like me. It is the only useful thing I have ever done with my knowledge. In doing it, I have been forced to confront the blueprint of my own failure. It was a house built on rot. You both knew it. I was the only one who couldn't see it. I have withdrawn my appeal. I will serve the time I earned. I hope the bookstore continues to thrive. I hope you build things that last." Lucas, he sent the letters. He did not expect a reply. Sending them was not about communication with them. It was about an internal line being crossed, a debt to truth being acknowledged, however incompletely. It was about finally, truly surrendering. The letter arrived at the bookstore on a rainy Tuesday. Amelia recognized the prison's return address. Her hands did not tremble as she opened it. She read it slowly, then handed it to her father without a word. Henry read it, his face impassive. He finished, folded the paper neatly along its original creases, and placed it on the counter. "Well," he said, "what do you think?" Amelia asked, her voice neutral. "I think it's a better use of his time than plotting a comeback," Henry said. He picked up a pricing gun and began tagging a new shipment of memoirs. "The first step out of a hole is to stop digging." "Should I write back?" Henry paused, considering. "That's your choice, Ellie. But ask yourself, what would it be for? For him or for you? Closure isn't something you give someone. It's something you find for yourself. You've already found yours." Amelia looked at the folded letter. She felt nothing, no anger, no pity, no satisfaction. It was like reading a weather report from a country she no longer lived in. The storm there was no longer her concern. She had built a sturdy house, and the rain fell elsewhere. She picked up the letter, walked it back, and fed it into the small stove they used to burn scrap paper. She watched the flames consume the words, the acknowledgement, the late-blooming regret. It turned to ash, and she stirred the ash into nothing. Then she went back to the front, to her father, to the books, to the quiet, durable life they had built together, word by word, board by board, day by patient day. In his cell, Lucas felt no great unburdening. He felt the same walls, the same cot, the same endless stretch of time. But something was different. A noise had stopped. The constant, internal static of justification, of blame-shifting, of fantasy. It was gone. The silence that remained was no longer hungry. It was just silence. The empty, neutral sound of a room after a long and violent argument has finally ended. It was not peace, but it was, for the first time, a form of honesty. And in that bare and honest silence, inmate number 89402 finally began the actual work of his sentence. Not just serving time, but understanding what time truly was. A limited currency he had spent on nothing, now gone forever, with only the painful clarity of its waste as a remainder. The loudest person in the room had been silenced, not by the walls of Otisville, but by his own long-delayed understanding. And the quiet ones, the gardener and his daughter, tended their garden, their shelves full of stories, their world growing steadily, soundly, and well. The story was over. The lesson, finally learned,